We have two speakers who are going to be talking to us about self-sufficiency, where all of these things come together: education, health, and safety, and how that connects with self-sufficiency of our citizens at all levels in our community. They're going to be talking about stable and affordable housing and financial self-sufficiency. We have Laurie Tufford, who is with the Kennewick Housing Authority, and also Gordon Comfort, who is with Goodwill Industries. So we'll start with Laurie.
Wow, I'm a little nervous. My name is Laurie Tufford, and I had worked with consumer credit counseling for a long time, and I've done a lot of programs and a lot of things about self-sufficiency. And when I was asked to talk about housing, I was a little intimidated, so hopefully this will work out well. But I want to start off just by defining what self-sufficiency is. And basically what they say self-sufficiency is the ability for someone to supply their own needs. And to take that just a little bit further, I'd like to talk a little bit about financial self-sufficiency, which would basically lead you to believe that you're able to cover your basic needs each and every month, that you have enough income to cover just your basic needs. And when I look at basic needs, what I look at is a roof over my head, clothes on my back, and food on my table. Now, in the industry that I came from at consumer credit counseling, I would get in quite a few arguments with individuals over basic needs. Try to convince a 16 to 25-year-old that a cell phone is not a basic need, or that there is life after cable. It's really interesting, the things that we take for granted that are a basic need. Where do people learn financial self-sufficiency from? It's unfortunate that you can't really. Parents aren't teaching it anymore, and in fact, in many instances, to learn financial self-sufficiency from your parents may lead you astray, because there's so many of the people that are actually in trouble themselves. But most people learn it from the school of hard knocks. They make mistakes, and hopefully they learn from those mistakes, and then they build on those mistakes to kind of differ the things that they've had. And when you think about education, I actually testified at the Kennewick School Board when they decided to make basic financial education a non-requirement for graduation. So none of our school districts actually have like what we would have as consumer ed or consumer science as an education requirement for graduation. They're looking at other things. So learning and where you learn your self-sufficiency comes from a lot of different places. You can't even a lot of times learn your financial education from your bankers, because they are not an independent third party. And in many cases, depending on who you bank with or what type of institution you go to, they often can lead you astray. So you have to be very careful. I worked as a credit counselor, certified credit education counselor, housing counselor for roughly 17 years. And I found that when people walked in our doors, they were already in financial crisis. They came to us for two specific reasons, and I'm going to kind of change it a little bit. But number one, they wanted us to give them more money so they could bail themselves out of the situation. They'd already gone to financial institutions, they've borrowed everything they could, and they wanted us to help them by giving them more money to reduce their payments so that they could make their bills. The other thing they wanted was a magic formula. How do I get myself out of this? And in reality, there is no magic formula. Financial self-sufficiency really is about one thing. You spend less than you make, and you save the difference. That's all it's about. Unfortunately, what happens is when people do get into trouble, they start to get creative, and they start looking at different ways to bail themselves out, when really what they need to do is buckle down and just kind of bail themselves out over a long period of time. And really the financial industry is always there to help. If you were all to sit and think about financing maybe your first home, you were required to put 20% down. Now you can get 0% financing on a vehicle. Think about your automobile car loans. I was a lender for quite a few years, where you actually, when you went in to borrow for a vehicle, it was 36 months financing. You had to put a significant amount down. Now it's 0% interest, 60 months, 72 months to finance a vehicle. No payments for the first 30 days. There's all kinds of incentives and wonderful ways to get you to actually go into debt. But you know, you don't have to be a homeowner to get into trouble. Think about my favorite thing, payday lending. I love payday lending. If you don't have enough money to last till your next paycheck, simply just go borrow against your new one that's coming. And if you were to go out and get a loan in Washington State, you can actually go out and borrow up to $750 of your next paycheck, and they're going to charge you a one-time $100 fee to do that. If your next paycheck comes within 2 weeks, like the 1st and the 15th, you will have paid somewhere between 360 to 420% interest for that transaction. What a deal! So you don't have to be a homeowner. You don't have to. It just, a lot of times when we borrow, we start off with the best intentions in mind, but when we get into trouble, we have a tendency to find a quick fix, and that doesn't always happen. So enough with that. I was actually asked to talk about housing, so we'll go there. Sorry. Tri-Cities actually is pretty lucky. In the recession that we've just basically have come through and are coming out of, the last 7 to 5 years, the Tri-Cities real estate market and the housing market has kind of pretty much stayed level. We've been pretty lucky and to get through this without too much havoc. Now, that's not to say that we've had individuals that have struggled. Housing prices did slump here in the Tri-City area, and there are individuals, because of the amount of money that they owed on their home, things that the credit industry has come up with, like 0% financing. And have you heard about an interest-only loan? That's a great deal. So we have gotten ourselves into some pickles, but for the most part, the Tri-City area has actually been pretty stable in the housing market. So we've been kind of lucky. So let's talk a little bit about the rental situation first. We have about 6,000 apartments units in the Tri-City area, which is not too bad. And right now, this is as of like 6 months ago, our vacancy rate was at 4.8%. We've seen it as low as 2%. I mean, there was like 99% of all the apartments in Tri-Cities were rented, and that was really difficult for people to find an apartment. But right now, we're sitting at about 4.8%. Anything around 5 is great for the apartment managers. They're excited about that number. And in addition to that, the prices for the apartments, if you are a family unit and you're going out to get roughly a 2-bedroom apartment, you're going to pay about $750 a month for that 2-bedroom apartment. There's a huge jump between a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom. You're going to pay roughly $1,000 a month. Great for the apartment managers, but not always great for the people who are maybe trying to start out or trying to rebuild their credit. What you're finding is a lot of individuals that are teaming up, getting roommates, living together, sharing the expense, or even worse, maybe a family unit where both husband and wife or both significant people have to work in order to make things meet. So when things are tight and people are struggling and the apartment rental amounts are up there where it might become difficult for someone to live in an apartment, what they do is you have subsidies, you have housing authorities, you have programs out there like Habitat for Humanity that actually try to help people get into situations or that help them make things more affordable. And I thought I would just take a quick snapshot of kind of what's going on in the Tri-City area between our 2 housing authorities. We have a Kennewick Housing Authority and then one in Pasco. And between just those 2 entities, we have 470 units of HUD subsidized public housing, 1,283 Section 8 housing vouchers, which basically these are people that own apartments and or homes that are renting to individuals that are working with the housing authorities, and their rent is being subsidized for that. 50 units of project-based local apartments, 138 mod rehab apartments over in Richland, 24 USDA subsidized farm workers housing units, 8-bed transitional housing, and we just had a new domestic violence duplex come online at the Kennewick Housing Authority that we're pretty excited about. This is roughly 2,000 families that we're helping just through the Kennewick and Pasco housing authorities. Now, the American dream is to own a home, so we need to switch over and talk a little bit about housing. This slide was really interesting to me because what it does is it takes the average price of the home that is purchased based on income, and then equates a house payment to that as well. And if you take an individual that's making between $0 and $40,000 a year, they are purchasing homes on average at $174,000, which really kind of surprised me, at a house payment of $868 for just the P&I, principal and interest. That equates to about 42% of their take-home pay. That's married to a house payment, and probably not affordable in as far as what I would consider. Then you take an individual between $40,000 and $60,000, and their average home price is $173,000, with a house payment of $861,000, and you can kind of see where that lies. Now, this is a 30-year mortgage at bankrate.com's rates as of about 3 days ago at 4.34% interest. Is that affordable? Maybe. It is affordable when you think about a 3-bedroom house that you're or a 3-bedroom apartment that you're renting. That's $1,000 a month. So then you think, well, why not rent, or why not go purchase a home? It makes more sense. But that creates challenges in itself, because most of you that in this room probably own a home. If something goes wrong with that home, what happens? You get to fix it. And if you're the actual person and you're finding yourself not only living in a tight situation but paycheck to paycheck, and something major happens to that home, it makes it very difficult for you to take care of the home or to fix or repair the home, and then you get into some kinds of trouble. I thought, based on this slide, that I should go to MLS, the multiple listings for the Tri-City area, just to kind of see what I could find. And last night I found houses under $139,000. There are currently 174 homes listed for sale in Kennewick, Pasco, Richland metropolitan area. Did not include the suburbs of Findlay, Benton City, Prosser. Of those 174, there are about 43 of them that were below $100,000. So we are, again, lucky in the fact that we do have some stock out there that's available and that people can actually purchase it. Just we need to make better choices as far as educating our home buyers to making sure that they're making good, strong decisions when they're purchasing a house, that they find something that is truly affordable for them. You know, not something that's at 46% debt to income ratio, but maybe somewhere around the line of 21 to 25% of the house payment. Because most people, let's face it, they don't just have a house payment. They have a house payment, a car payment, and as soon as they get their house, then everybody knows they've established credit and purchased a home. Now they get all these pre-approval offers, so they go out and buy the furniture, and they can finance that. And they go out and buy other things, and then they get student loans. And so people have a tendency to get into trouble in a big hurry. So we need to do a better job as far as educating our borrowers to make sure that the decisions that they make are truly a smart decision for them. Just because you qualify for a $200,000 home doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right choice for you. Our supply and demand are pretty good. We've had some really nice apartments growth recently. We have a wonderful new apartment complex in the Southridge area. We've had some wonderful success recently in senior housing in the Richland area, but we can do a better job. If Tri-Cities continues to grow like it has been, and we do reach $500,000 or more, or 500,000 people or more, we're going to need more places for those people to live. So supply and demand can be an issue. And then we have to be careful about the credit industry coming up with wonderful ways to help us out. It was interesting to me that when prices, actually I can say that when my husband and I bought our first home, we've been married 27 years now, we looked at a home in South Kennewick, and we looked at our annual salary versus the price of the home, and we kind of tried to make those two things equal. So if we made $75,000 a year, we purchased a home for $75,000 a year. But now, because of the way that the lending criteria and the credit industry has changed, you see people that are making $30,000 a year buying a home for $174,000 a year. And how is that happening? Because now it's not a 30-year mortgage. We now have 40-year mortgages. We now have interest-only loans on jumbo rate mortgages. And frankly, isn't interest-only mortgage renting? But we do it. We still do it. So we have to be very careful about predatory lending as well. I'm going to skip that one. It was really interesting to sit here and to listen to the different 4 aspects of the United Way Community Solutions Plan and how interconnected they are. It's kind of awesome that when you talk about stable and affordable housing, you talk about stabilizing lives, strengthening families, safety within your community, education, and how that is implied by people who are actually living and buying and purchasing homes, and your health benefits as well. So it really is interesting that it's all so truly connected, and it's an honor to be here with this panel. Let me tell you, I'm really kind of humbled by where I am, but I appreciate it, and thank you for having me.
Hello, my name is Gordon, and I'm with Goodwill Industries of the Columbia. It's great to be here. If everyone could lower their expectations of a great finale, that will help. That'll help you, and it will help me, and we'll both get out of this together. I really am grateful to be here, and frankly, just as was just mentioned, it's humbling to be on this panel, and I also applaud the audience here for spending your morning. And as I look across, I imagine there's a lot of social organizations here that are represented, and I really appreciate that. And it really was impacted by Adea and her message of hope, and I really sincerely appreciate that, and I'll remember that for a long, long time. So thank you for being here. Let's see, I was asked to talk on financial self-sufficiency, and thankfully it wasn't my own, just in general. We can talk about self-sufficiency. One thing that, if you look at this dictionary definition, it talks about without external assistance. I found that really interesting. I think, you know, growing up, you always think about owning a home or having a job, and there's no doubt that you're going to be externally viable from anybody else, from parents and whatnot. And then you go to school, and then you end up back at your parents' house, and you know, oh, I wasn't talking about me. That's right, I forgot about that. And then the last part is that extreme confidence in one's own abilities, and that really hits me about really what we're about, particularly the Goodwill Industries when we're working with people with employment. A wise friend once told me that the best social program is work. If you really think about that, it's true. The best social program is work. And if you look at all the up and down this aisle from education, health, and safety, and now self-sufficiency, how that all melds together to hopefully someone is externally viable, that they can have employment, and that they can work, and that they can support themselves and their families. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And as you go through those different components, from education to health and safety, when those safety nets fall apart, and they get to us, the employment services, where we now have to hopefully try to mend and fix what was not properly put together in the first place. And that's really difficult. If anybody has tried, is they've gotten older, to change a habit or change a thought pattern, it's a little bit more difficult as you get older, and I've found that out myself. Let's see here. So we define employment, and we'll go on. Let me talk about my dad real fast. My dad grew up in a very broken home. He was given up by his mom and dad at a court hearing. They both said, actually, we don't want him, and luckily his aunt was there to say, well, I'll take him. And my dad grew up in his aunt's home, and I don't need to go through all of it. But what really amazed me was that my dad worked for 30 plus years in a warehouse. And I had five of us, I have 4 sisters, and supported us. And I'm going to come back a little bit later to my dad, but what I really want you to think about, I'm not going to ask you to close your eyes because that's scary, but I want you to think about who in your life taught you your work ethic. Because I'm assuming everybody here, probably not Adea, but everyone else in here has a job, right? You have a job, and who taught you to work? Because I think everyone in here thinks, well, I have a good work ethic, right? But who taught you that? So have that person in mind. As we go through some of these slides, who taught you that? Because I would like to submit to you, and kind of my whole point of my presentation today is that not everyone had that person, or didn't pay attention to that person when they could have. We have a lot to be thankful for here in Tri-Cities. Go through here real fast. Great population base, diverse expanding mix of industries, decent cost of living, affordable housing, maybe too affordable, and a wonderful lifestyle. However, there's a lot of folks around us that face a lot of challenges and barriers. And let me talk about a few of those things. First, the labor force here, and this is as of August, 132,000 in the labor force, potential labor force, and 122,000 of them were employed. Our employment rate was 7.7%. So of those 10,000 that weren't employed, all of them have a face and a story. And those of us who work in the employment industries, and maybe you don't understand that about Goodwill Industries, maybe you just think that that's a thrift store and that you go there and you buy clothes or you donate your clothes or other household items. But we take that revenue from that and we provide services to help people find jobs out in the community, both people with disabilities and other barriers to employment, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So each of those 10,000 have a face and a name. So not only think about that person who gave you that work ethic, but also think about someone else who may be unemployed. And I imagine you probably find somebody. And oftentimes we think of the Tri-Cities, we think, well, okay, well, this is a great place to live. There's no problem living here. And really, if you look at the composite index of housing, utilities, and transportation, really we do live in a great place. And kind of a comparison of numbers there, you know, Reno would, on this list, would be the only place that would be a little bit less expensive to live as compared to where we are now. Just go over to the wet side, and you'll see that Seattle at 121.5% of the composite index, you know, versus ours of 94.9. Obviously, this is a cheaper place to live, but still, there's still that 7.7%, that 10,000 of our fellow Tri-Citians that struggle with employment. So let's look at some of those common barriers that they face. So you got that person in mind that maybe is unemployed, or those people that are unemployed. And as you go through there, look at some of those. And a lot of these have already been talked about today, some of these barriers. It was really interesting to listen to Dave Bond, and when he spoke about that, I think it was 35 out of 1,195, a little less than 3% of those third graders that didn't have that one or other barrier. One barrier was an ESL, English as a second language, and also as the not involved in SPED, or I have an IEP, special education. If they didn't have one of those two barriers, 97% of those kiddos passed their exam in the third grade. That's a pretty amazing stat. So if you look at those, and trying to make that connection here, if you look at these barriers here, often the people that we face in our employment programs have many of these barriers, many. And one of those things that you probably never really thought about is that a barrier to employment. If you look down on the left, second one up there where it says has a child with special needs. That is a major barrier to employment for a lot of people. And as money has gone away from that population and support from our state and from the federal government, this forces a lot of people into unemployment. It's an amazing stat that prior to coming to Goodwill, I had no idea that problem existed. And if you look along there, you see a lot of other barriers that are common throughout our commonalities, many common barriers. What I find interesting most, though, is that most people that we deal with just want a job. They have all these different barriers, they just want a job. And they want that self-sufficiency to come in their own form. The sufficiency is there. We talked about different avenues, different safety net pieces, but really to have that self-sufficiency without external assistance, to be able to support yourself and your family. What a dream. If really that is the American dream, isn't it? It's that house, that picket fence and all that, no porch apparently, but, right? I don't know where you're, thanks, Brian. But really, the American dream is all about being able to support ourselves. What we do as service agencies, those of you guys don't know, I kind of talked about this already, but we provide education, training, job search, and resume, and interviewing help for people with those barriers, and it's difficult. I want you to consider this. What would you do if you lost your job? And you would get another one. And why would you be able to get another one? I totally agree. Go back to Rich Cummings and what he said. Remember that slide that talked about for anybody that had a bachelor's degree, there was no recession. For those that had a high school diploma or less, there was no recovery. And that's an amazing stat. So a lot of us out here, again, going off what Brian said, we don't necessarily represent all of the Tri-Cityans, especially those without a job, since most of us have a job. We aren't representative, especially since we do have diplomas, most of us in here. It's interesting to me, that was like Rich said, that was a jaw-dropping slide there. So you just go back and get another one, wouldn't you? But what if you weren't able, or you didn't, or I said you lacked those abilities to go do that? How would you feel? I have 5 kids. I have my daughter and I have 4 sons. And if I wasn't able to have a job, just the despair that would be in my life. But that's why I went to school. Every day my dad would come home from the warehouse, and he would lay on the couch and he'd say, "Gordy, take off my boots." And I'd take off his boots, and he'd say, "Get an education. Get an education." And I listened. My sisters, not so much. I did. And I'm grateful for my dad for that. Here's what we know. Those with disabilities are often limited to low-paying jobs. However, just so you know, if you're have opportunities to hire others or to influence the hiring of others, those with disabilities often demonstrate the best attitudes about working and have the lowest absenteeism and turnover. They're great people to work with, awesome people to work with. They can change your attitude with their smiles every single day. It's wonderful to work with people with disabilities who are just happy to have a job sometimes, and they're just happy about life. Their outlook is completely different than ours, and it's fun. And I can see Kay from CI nodding her head. Another interesting aspect about, if we looked at those barriers, would be those who have a criminal past. When they come out, often as I sit in my chair at Goodwill Industries, I'll get letters from incarcerated citizens who are looking for help. They'll say mostly it's along the same lines of, "I'll be getting out of jail soon. Is there any help out there? I don't have anybody to help me." There's no safety net coming out of jail. It's something that is difficult and was spoken about earlier. So when they come out of the correctional facility, what am I going to do is often the question, and can Goodwill Industries help me? After completing the sentence, they can't find a job. And so one of the leading causes, depending on the research that you read, it is the leading cause of recidivism, is their lack of ability to get a job. And that's a really difficult step. And we try to help them, and we, meaning all the employment service providers here in the Tri-Cities, help trying to place people with criminal past, but it's incredibly difficult, especially when you get into the sexual crimes. To reduce recidivism, employment agencies, local and correctional facilities, and employers, we need to work together. Everybody in this room, and we need to be part of that change that has been spoken about today. As a community, I know that we can all believe in a hand up, not in a handout. And I think that's the most important part about employment. It's that hand up mentality. When people go to work, it increases self-esteem and confidence, and it's all about building families and communities. And employment builds dignity. So when we talk about self-sufficiency, what we're really talking about are job creation and growth, and we're speaking about education, families, strong communities, and the American dream, as we discussed. And going back and finishing up with my dad, I learned so much from my dad. You know, he worked 30 years in that warehouse. He was never financially wealthy, still is not. He's retired now, thankfully. But he taught me so much. Think back to that person that you had in your mind earlier that taught you that work ethic. And then go back to what was talked about earlier about mentors. How could you mentor a young person and teach them that work ethic? I work on my 5 kids, and I often find when they bring their friends over, I'm putting them to work too. They don't come over very often, I don't know why, but I put my kids to work. Hopefully you're putting your kids to work and getting them off the couch, and maybe we can reduce some of that obesity. I'm glad I didn't have to follow that. I'm grateful for my dad. He's a wonderful, wonderful human being who taught me how to work, and I know as we work on employment issues in our Tri-Cities and in our state and in our country, that self-sufficiency and our ability to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps can happen. Thank you.